In the summer of 2008, the Friends of the Classic Malts chose to celebrate the whiskies in the Classic Malt selection with the commission of 13 original paintings, each inspired by one of the whiskies and painted by artists living and working in Scotland. As a body of work, they capture not just the individual characters of the whiskies and the distilleries in which they are made, but also the landscape of Scotland itself. So let's take a short tour, starting in the west on the beautiful island of Skye. Skye, like many of the islands of Scotland's west coast, has long been famous for its striking terrain and the rugged character of its people, traits reflected amply in its legendary whisky, Talisker. Commemorating the whisky is a batik by Selma Rebus entitled Biantau Duba Achio, or Misty Black Hills for those of us not versed in Gaelic.
So I wanted to be in Skye, and I wanted to feel, you know, the ambience of the place, and so I decided to go and see the distillery for myself and meet the manager. I was so surprised when I got to Carbost and saw the distillery. I remember driving at night thinking, wow, this is, yeah, I like this. Next morning I went to visit the distillery and I was shown around, and they were very, very helpful, and I knew in my mind what I wanted. Once, you know, I'd been in Carbost, I'd seen the Coolins, and I knew I wanted to have them within the batik, but also incorporate the distillery.
From the pier you probably get the best view of Talisker unless you actually manage to take a boat out into Loch Harcourt, because you get the Coolins in the background. And as we mentioned earlier on, you know, that they're very dramatic mountains, they're very famous mountains. Probably one of the main reasons that people come to Skye, apart from visiting the distillery, of course.
The Dalwhinnie distillery is situated between the gentle grassy lowlands and Speyside, which begins some 25 miles to the north. The style of the whisky made here, however, is that of the Highlands, a resilient marriage of gentleness and spirit. The name Dalwhinnie actually means meeting place, and dates back to when cattle drovers would meet here. With this in mind, artist Terry Adams saw the whisky as a meeting of its ingredients, resulting in one of Scotland's most gentle malts. Just one glass of Glenord malt whisky, once memorably described as perilously drinkable, reveals a subtle paradox. This isn't a sweet, delicate Speyside, nor is it wreathed in Isla's smokiness, but there is something of both to be enjoyed here, and it's a duality reflected beautifully in Laura Newberry's Glenord distillery from the fields. Before we take the road up to Speyside, we have one more Highland malt to consider. In the heart of Royal Deeside, just a mile or so along the banks of the River Dee from Balmoral Castle, lies the distillery of Royal Loch Nagar, the title and subject of the painting by architect and artist John Wetton Brown.
Lots of my paintings have got buildings in them and they're all a bit squinty, and that was it's probably a reaction against drawing straight lines on a drawing board all the time. I think you'd call them perspectively challenged. I think people generally find my colour coordination quite unique, if that's not too boastful. But I just see it as bright colour. I mean, I suppose what I'm trying to say is that what I see there, for instance, which is very colourful, you might see completely different.
We'll head north now, past Inverness to the coastal east of the Scottish Highlands, to call in at the Clynelish distillery. You can almost taste the sea air here, with its crisp, medium-bodied, mustard-fresh style. Although there isn't Isla's pungent smokiness here, there is a trace or two of it. Don't think that this is a heavy malt though. Its clean taste makes it a fine aperitif. For the spirit of Clynelish, artist David Kerr took a semi-abstract approach. Oban is the frontier between the West Highlands and the Islands, the meeting place between land and sea. A perfect sheltered harbour makes it the principal seaport for the Isles and the capital of the West Highlands.
Yeah, I think the distillery is painted by a lot of local artists and some famous artists as well. What I thought was unusual about Sarah's painting was that she did it from the opposite perspective, in that she's painted the distillery from a cake's tower
looking down on the back of the distillery. So it's quite unusual because most distillery paintings depict the front of the distillery, and sometimes I feel the distillery can be lost in with the other buildings of the town. Well, when you're up at McCaig's Tower in that viewpoint, it really does give you a really spectacular view over Oban Bay and beyond. Obviously you can see the town itself, and it's beautiful both during the day and also at night time as well, where Oban's lit up. It's pretty spectacular. I think Sarah's really captured the west coast, particularly the harbour of Oban.
A short hop across the sea to the Isle of Islay brings us to the bracing setting of the Lagavulin distillery. Here, in the still mainly Gaelic-speaking community around Port Ellen, on the island's southeastern shore, just 12 people craft the pungent, dark Lagavulin. Artist James Dunbar's work comes out of exploring the spiritual connections between people and their environment as they develop over time. It's worth remaining on Islay for a while and heading up to the north end of the island, where we find the subject for Robert Gould's fine painting, Where the Heather Meets the Sea. Robert's depiction of the Kalila distillery embodies one of the whisky's most distinctive elements. Focus is drawn to the curve of the Kalila Cove as its seawater saltiness finds its way into the flavour of the malt. The lowlands are not endowed with as many malts as the rest of the country, yet one distillery stands out to this day, Glenkinchie. Because of its closeness to Scotland's capital city, the distillery is a famed stopping point on the tourist trail, and the proud producer of what is commonly known as the Edinburgh malt, the pale, dry aperitif of choice for polite society.
Here you're in a valley because the Kinchie Burn, which is the water of life for Glenkinchie, little burn, it joins the East Lothian Tyne and then to the sea. So we're in a valley here, so apart from the distillery there wasn't an aspect, and I felt that I had to show the fields of grain, the wildflowers, the gentle lowlands, the hills, and even on the hills you can see where the fields are being farmed, the trees. The silver birches here were important for me, so they had to go in. And as you say, as you come in through the gates, you've got this lovely barrel. I love the colour as well. So I love here, in fact, Glenkinchie, you've got these nice creamy white buildings in old brick, maybe Portobello brick from Edinburgh, and then you've got the darker rusty coloured bricks, Victorian bricks. So I think it was a nice subject to do, and something that gave me a lot of inspiration, and I just hope I've done it justice, you know.
Finally, we head up to Speyside, home of many of Scotland's most famous malt whiskies. Our first stop, Knockandow. On his first visit to the Knockandow distillery, Brian Madden was inspired by the panoramic view. In his hands, this epic vista became a watercolour of rare detail, setting the distillery in the lush green Speyside farmland. Founded at the end of the whisky boom in 1898, the Glen Elgin distillery was built and designed by the notable distillery architect Charles Doig of Elgin.
This one I thought maybe I might use a whisky colour ink. This is actually painted in ink. Certainly this ink, used in certain ways, gives a very typical Scottish effect, which in Scotland we call it dreich. There's no other word to say dreich, and it's when it's wet, damp, misty, soft, and everything is slightly diffused.
High on the hills on the north side of the Spey Valley, with extensive views to the south, the Cardew distillery occupies countryside that has long inspired artist Jane Lanigan. Blending this quintessentially Scottish landscape with the oriental style of the distillery's pagoda towers proves particularly evocative in her painting, Reflections of Cardew. Finally, we come to Cragganmore, the final stop in our journey, via the studio of artist Keith Salmon.
And we wandered around for a day, basically just taking lots of photos and just trying to get a feel for the place. And this within the individual fields of barley, there was all this line and sort of quite sort of bright but subtle colours, and yeah, it fits in very, very well with this kind of scratchy sort of nature of my work these days. It was ideally suited. Yeah.
So there we have it, all 13 pieces now complete. Biantau Duba Accio, or Misty Black Hills, by Selma Rebus. Glenore Distillery, From the Fields, by Laura Newbury. Home of the Gentle Spirit, by Terry Adams. The Distillery at Royal Lochnagar, by John Wetton Brown. The Spirit of Clynelish, by David Kerr. Blue Moon, by Sarah Mead. Lagavulin Outlook, by James Dunbar. Where the Heather Meets the Sea, by Robert Gould. Barleycorn, The Spirit of Glenkinchie, by Mike Shepley. Nakando Distillery, Speyside, by Brian Madden. Glen Elgin, Through the Trees, by Lynn Scobie. Reflections of Cardew, by Jane Lanigan. Overlooking Cragganmore, Late Summer, by Keith Salmon.